Welcome back. Senate Democrats blocking yet another motion to get the Department of Homeland Security funded and open. Today marks day 28 of this shutdown of the DHS. This is the fourth time since February that Democrats have voted to block any legislation. They are still demanding major reforms to ICE and border protection, even though ICE is already funded. But the threat of Iranian terrorist cells is rising across the country in retaliation to Operation Epic Fury. President Trump says he has eyes on all of them. Watch this.
If they try to hit us back, have you been briefed about how many Iran sleeper cells there could be inside the U.S. right now?
I have been, and a lot of people came in through Biden with this stupid open border. But we know where most of them are. We've got our eye on all of them, I think. They came in through the open border policies of sleepy Joe Biden, and we've got our eyes on all of them. But the war itself is being prosecuted at a level that nobody's seen before. It's pretty amazing to watch.
Just yesterday, a naturalized citizen from Lebanon rammed his vehicle into a synagogue near Detroit. The suspect was shot and killed by security officers, while a previously convicted ISIS supporter opened fire at Old Dominion University, killing an ROTC instructor. Joining me now is former House Speaker and Fox News contributor Newt Gingrich. Newt, thanks very much for being here. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. So much to get into, but let's start with this DHS shutdown. We've got threats rising that are, upsetting people because they are threats to the homeland, America, and yet the Department of Homeland Security is still shut down for 28 days. Your reaction?
Well, I mean, first of all, you have Democrat partisanship overwhelming the patriotism. So they're doing things that make sense to them as partisans, but it's very unpatriotic to be stopping the Department of Homeland Security when we have an active, clear war, a real threat. The leading supporter of terrorism since 1984, every year, the State Department has designated Iran as the leading supporter of state terrorism in the world. So for us to be in the middle of this fight and have the Democrats be literally unpatriotic from the standpoint of the country. Forget Donald Trump, forget the Republicans, just from the standpoint of the country, when you have a threat like this, to behave this partisan. But there's a second part to this whole thing. They're holding the country hostage. I urge every person who stands in line at the airport for unnecessary hours to use that spare time to call their Democratic congressmen, their Democratic senators, to call in to talk radio, and to make clear that they understand they are being held hostage. Every air traveler is being held hostage. Domestic airlines are being held hostage. They're going to suffer both because of higher oil prices, aviation fuel prices, and they're going to suffer because of the chaos at the airports. So you're watching the Democrats. I literally, as a historian, don't remember either party being this methodically unpatriotic in the way in which they're dealing with what is a national crisis, and one which could become much worse very fast.
Well, and it is becoming much worse when you look at the cost of this. I mean, look, this morning we've got a new threat from Iran. They're going to start targeting U.S. banks. But already people are watching oil prices spike out of control. I mean, look at oil this morning, which, of course, crude is sort of looking to be stabilizing right now, but it's at $95 a barrel. Brent has already hit 100. It is hovering around $100 a barrel right now. Iran's new supreme leader claims the Strait of Hormuz must remain effectively closed to affect the enemy, right? I mean, you've got Brent and crude down a fraction this morning, but even you posted this on X. You say Iran's strategy in this conflict is clearer than many people realize. It is not about defeating the United States militarily. It is about disrupting oil and forcing global pressure for a truce. Yes. And if we see this kind of move going into the midterm elections, this is going to affect even more. And that is the Republican leadership, is it not?
Sure. Look, there are two parts to this. First, the goal has to be to replace the religious dictatorship, which has said openly since 1979 that it's at war with the United States. The Iranian parliament just weeks ago was chanting death to America. The Iranian revolution has literally killed Americans, killed 200 and some Marines in Lebanon, for example. So this is a very dangerous government, and we cannot end this war without replacing it or we will have been defeated and they will go right back to being dangerous. But second, the center of gravity in this war is the Straits of Hormuz. It's not Tehran. If the Navy and the Air Force can intervene and maybe the Coast Guard and can stop the effort to close the straits, which Reagan did in the 1980s when I was a member of Congress. If we can reopen the straits, the price of oil will collapse. Everyone will be relatively happy. And the American people, as long as we don't put in ground troops, the American people will accept whatever it takes to eliminate a country. Remember, the Iranians had their way. The threat right now would be nuclear weapons taking out an American city. That's what's at stake. And when I watch these people who want Iran to win, every time you see somebody on TV who talks about a truce, they're talking about the Iranians winning. And I cannot understand the logic that says, why don't we let our mortal enemy get nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles? Because sooner or later, they will use them, and they will use them against American cities.
So you have a confidence that the U.S. can actually go in there in the straits and reverse this to try to secure the straits. I mean, today, oil companies are worried that there's more security needed. They don't know if drones are going to come out of nowhere from Iran and take their tankers down.
Look, I mean, one of the things I've suggested is to go back to World War I and World War II and look at the use of what were called Q ships. And a Q ship was actually kind of a merchant ship, looked like a merchant ship, except it was very heavily armed and it was designed to lure in German submarines and destroy them. Well, our version, because of the nature of the threat here, we ought to pick up, 20 or 30 or 40 of the derelict tankers and simply station them directly off the Iranian coast to form a shield in effect so that we can move the rest of the vehicles, the rest of the tankers, the real tankers, behind them and force the Iranians to come out in the open and just accept that for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, we're going to have a real campaign. I mean, I remember in the 1980s when I was a congressman and Ronald Reagan was president, at one point they hit an American warship with an Iranian mine. And a couple of days later, Reagan took out half the Iranian Navy in 48 hours to send a signal. And we were very tough about this. We also faced mines. You're always going to face mines in the region, and the Navy and the Coast Guard should be prepared to go in. Mines are mostly passive, and they should go in there and take them out.
So, Newt, let me switch gears, get your take on how all of this is going to impact the upcoming November midterm elections. Former White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel is working with Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, wanting the Democrats to frame the narrative on, quote, how President Trump's military adventurism is worsening Americans' economic security. That's what Rahm and Hakeem are putting together here. Some strategists tell me that the Republicans have got to get this fixed in terms of the price of oil, the perception of the impact of this war by July, or face a serious impact, negative. Your reaction, and what do you think the Republicans need to do to ensure that the American people understand the mission of Operation Epic Fury and understand that perhaps this impact on oil is temporary?
Well, let me start with Rahm's language. If you think defending American cities, stopping nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorists, doing what is necessary to protect American lives, if you think that's adventurism, you're probably a left-wing Democrat. But if you're a realistic person and you realize what would happen with one nuclear weapon on one American city, the scale of the disaster, the human suffering, then frankly, you're not part of the Rahm Emanuel formula. Second, Republicans can win this campaign. George H.W. Bush was 19 points down in May and won by 8 points on Election Day. It was very simple. We have to convince the American people that their lives personally will be better off, their families will be better off, and their country will be better off with our policies. And one of the challenges for the Trump team is they have so many good policies, whether it's the tax on tips, or it's that they cut, or it's the cut in the tax on Social Security, or it's the increase in the child tax credit. I mean, just go down. It's an amazing list of things that the president has done on a wide front. The problem is our communications is about 10% as effective right now. So they've got to focus very heavily, I think, right now in communicating what the choices are and making people see clearly that down one road with the Democrats is enormous danger to the country and a terrible long-term future. Down the other road, you have people who will protect America and people who will, in fact, provide greater prosperity, greater take-home pay, lower cost health insurance. I mean, there are a lot of things Trump is doing that aren't being communicated very effectively.
I agree with you. I agree with the communication issues. You're right. Speaker, good to see you. Thank you. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, stay with us. We'll be right back.